We off?
Just a sec. Hello and welcome to today's strategic forum from the National Home Improvement Council. Today we're hearing from Kim Motruk from the Office of Product Safety and Standards and her team. So over to you, Kim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So thanks again ever so much for inviting us along to this meeting to talk to you about, introduce ourselves, the new National Regulator for Construction Products, and to bring along colleagues to talk to you about the developing strategy instruments who are going to support us in our regulatory endeavours. So first of all, I'll just give a real high level intro that kind of gives you a bit of an insight as to where I'm going with this presentation. So here we are. So the government committed to establish the new regulator for construction products. It's part of the Dame Judith Hackett's recommendations as part of her review a few years ago now. And so we were appointed last January, actually, around about now. I think the actual statement went out into the House. And we were asked to broaden our remit to take on construction products. And you'll see why in a moment. We will be operating as a joint unit with DLUC, the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities, and we are directly accountable to the Secretary of State, which is currently is Michael Gove. So that's how we're all working. So whilst I am employed by the Department for Business, I am accountable directly to the Secretary of State for Levelling Up. So that's kind of the structure of us all. We will, of course, work closely with the new building safety regulator and other regulators to create what we call coherent enforcement, because we are only responsible ourselves for the bit that is to do with construction products effectively as they go on sale. So that it needs to, in terms of the whole thing, we need to be working with other regulators to do that. And to do that, we've got dedicated funding. Thank you, Dee. I didn't change it. MHCLG, it says there, apologies. We have dedicated funding from DLUC so that we protect our existing regulatory functions, again, that I'll come on to, because we do other regulation for other departments. But the way we're going to do that, because we're an established regulator, we're going to integrate it into what we already do. So in the main, we're just buying more scientists, we're having more analysts, we're having more technical experts, more regulators specifically on construction products. But fundamentally, it's integrated into what we're already doing to save on the management costs. So that's a very high level overview of what I'll kind of talk about as we go forward. So who are we? So some of you have never heard of us ever. We are experts in product regulation, and I'll tell a little bit more about that on the next slide. So what we do is we've got a track record in solving challenges. As I said earlier, we're an existing organisation. We've been doing this for a long time. And effectively, all my colleagues are strong regulators. Our Chief Executive, Graham Russell, I'd say, has got a regulator stuck through him like a stick of rock. And they've got a lot of strong regulatory backgrounds. And because of that, we've got strong linkages to other regulators and industry. What's different is we own the regulator's code, which is something some of you may know about. It's the code of practice that all regulators stick to, not just us, but all regulators. And we own that. It's our policy area within BAYS. But fundamentally, in terms of this particular meeting, we have a track record in working with stakeholders to deliver our work. It's how we do things around here. So particularly that helped us out a lot when we were coming to the end of the EU transition period. We relied very heavily on these relationships to make the changes we need to do in getting those things done. And we've got a reputation across Whitehall for doing these things, which is why we were asked to do it ourselves. And this is a bit of detail about why we have the expertise in product regulation. So our big job is as the National Regulator for Consumer Products. That's things like your white goods, your electronic devices, and things like that, toys, cosmetics, things like that we are the regulator for. But also we've got legal metrology. That's weights and measures to you and I. I didn't know what that was until I came here, but it's the weights and measures to most people. And to that effect, we've actually got laboratories out in Teddington where we do testing. And for example, we actually are the weigh the lottery balls, for example, and we've got the original pint glass at those premises. So that's the kind of bit on legal metrology that we do. But we also lead government policy on product safety and legal metrology, as well as hallmarking and market surveillance. And we've got the responsibility now for product safety at our borders. So things coming into the country. We kind of also lead on what standards and accreditation policy right across government, so not just for what our products, but right across government. So working with the BSI, the British Standards Institute, and UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, I'm sure you'll all have heard of. And surprisingly, we sponsor the British Hallmarking Council, which is fascinating for me because I don't live too far from Birmingham, the home of the Jewellery Quarter, if you've ever heard of it. So that's what we do there. But because of all of that, we are the enforcement authority for other areas of regulation, and those are pretty much related to the environmental impact of trade, the use and disposal of products, and the standards and measurement required to support energy supply infrastructure. So we account at other parts of BEIS, other government departments, particularly DEFRA, on timber regulations, the regulation of substances hazardous to health, ROS, and things like conflict minerals. So they're also a fascinating array of things that we do in terms of products and how we regulate products. So it wasn't a surprise that we were kind of asked to pick up construction products. It is a completely different ballgame, I might add. So that's who we are. I'll just move us on. So this is our kind of corporate mission, to be a trusted product regulator for the UK. So we're about protecting people and places. And in this particular case, specifically residents and the built environment. We want to enable businesses to thrive about promoting a sustainable, compliant and confident building culture. And that's about level playing field stuff, really. We want to make sure that nobody's cheating, that everybody gets a fair chance of that all. And that's quite heart of what we do. It's that level playing field is really important to us to make in terms of business confidence and business competitiveness. And yeah, I would say that, wouldn't I, coming from the Department for Business. But it's about choice as well. We want to help the construction industry make the right choices on the products that they're buying, and that's all about the information that you gather when construction products are put on the market. And as I mentioned, we lead good regulatory practice, and critically at the moment with construction products, we are supporting local regulation, and that's because under the current regime and future regime, local authority trading standards will still have the powers to take enforcement action. As I'm moving forward, the challenge was identified in the Hackett review, as everybody's familiar with, but just to refresh our memories, at the time, MHCLG as it was, Robert Jenrick was the Secretary of State, and he wanted us to, in his written ministerial statement in January, as I say, it was around about now, he wanted us to address the rotten culture and confront poor practice, establish new norms that restore public confidence in the industry. Residents deserve and expect nothing less. So that's what he said way back in January, and that's kind of the big task, if you like, that we were set. And you'll have more than likely heard the new Secretary of State strengthen those kind of conversations in the recent weeks in his reset statements. So the issues that we've kind of come across. It's about transparency, really, in terms of the information coming out from suppliers and manufacturers. Are the goods supplied as they described, I suppose, really? Are they labelled accurately? Are they giving the right kind of information? Will they be misused on buildings if it's not right? Are they traceable? Can we actually find the problem because we can't find a trace of the project? And can we test them to clear requirements? If we can't test them to clear requirements, there's no confidence that they can comply with the law or with the regulations. And there's been this recognition that over time there's been an absence of regulatory oversight and has allowed the safety culture to drift. And that's kind of been one of the key challenges levelled at the industry. Moving us on a little bit. And so what we're saying is, without effective regulation, behaviour and culture have been unacceptable, putting lives at risk, but also without trusting the system as it stands, then costs rise, don't they, in terms of insurance for suppliers and builders and residents. So it's quite a big thing that we've been asked to tackle. So we expected some gaps, and this was Dame Judy Hackett kind of identified them, and I'm sure that you're familiar with them. They're out of one of her sections in her report. So what she said, that what we were lacking was a clear and effective specification and testing regime, and you'll know there's been a review of the test regime going on at the moment with DLUT leading on that. It's lacking manufacturer commitment to test and retest products based on risk. So there's currently no requirement to do risk assessment. We think we lack sufficient and accountable test houses, and that's about capacity in our test house system. We think we lack simple and streamlined standards to drive improvement. There are currently 400 BSI standards and another 400, it's a different layer, I'll come on to it in a moment. There's another 400 systems to test to as well. So it's kind of extremely complicated. And so the streamlining is an issue. It lacks a consistent labelling and traceability system. That's all about the information that's out there to support your product. And it lacks an effective enforcement and complaints system with national oversight. And so that's what the kind of regime that Dame Judith Hackett kind of described as she investigated what had happened. The scale of it is huge. Technical assessments, that was the word I'd lost, sorry. The scale of it is huge. So it's 1 in 6 manufacturing firms, Deluxe reports suggest, actually manufacture construction products. And most of them, look at that, 75% of them almost have got fewer than 10 employees. So it's very, very a kind of dispersed market. But the value of the construction market in the UK is huge as well, up to £60 billion, dependent on the definitions being used. But also we can see that in terms of import, 3.5% of all imported goods are to do with construction products, which again is quite a massive thing, and the billion size of it all. So as I mentioned before, there's 440 designated standards and another 400 technical assessments and 9 technical assessment bodies in the UK. So that's the scale of the thing that we're actually dealing with. It is huge. So what's been the response? So obviously they've set up a new national regulator for construction products, and as I mentioned, integrating into OPSS. And this is our core kind of way in which we do things. Our work is built on these 5 pillars really. We analyse, so we look at what does the intelligence tell us, what's the science telling us, what's the risk telling us. That's about all the information and the teams that we've got that are ploughing their kind of brain power into this particular system. What do we do? What do we know? What do we understand? What do we do? How do we use that information to inform our businesses and inform customers? And that's about our guidance and stuff that we put out on that. And then how do we use all of those kind of things in terms of our enforcement activity? Underneath all of that is our building, and so this is what we're doing right at this moment in time. We're building our capacity right at this minute in time, and we're growing our capability to around about 113 more full-time people working for OPSS to build on each of those particular teams. That's about the policy area, that's a testing area, our digital, and our kind of general enforcement capability will be on that. And underneath all of that is our monitoring and evaluation position. So we're looking at how we manage our benefits, how we monitor them, how we evaluate, how we measure ourselves, as how do we know we're any good? And that's a big question, isn't it? How do we know you're doing the right thing? So we've got all that sort of set up. So that's how we're going to do it. It's an integration system that I mentioned earlier. So the role of regulation is about us kind of, we'll lead and coordinate the construction product regulatory system, but it can't be fixed by regulatory intervention alone. There are lots of players in this system, and everyone has their part in changing this culture. We'll bring leadership to it all, help set out what needs to happen to it all, but again, always proportionate, always consistent, and always effective. And I suppose really for your members, it's about what role can your members play in fixing this system. And in terms of home improvements, I imagine that a lot of you are buying these construction products, and if we can help you understand what good looks like when you're buying these things, it's part and parcel of you playing your role in doing that. Or if you find something that's wrong, letting us know about it. That's the other thing that you could do. So it's important that everyone plays their role in the system. So this is a little bit about how we are going to close the gaps. And as I mentioned, market analysis is really important. As I said earlier, we're about risk-based interventions. And so what we're doing at the minute is establishing a bit of an evidence base several research projects going at the moment. Some of your colleagues may well have been invited to participate in those. One off the top of my head is about supply chains that we're working with. So that's really important that we get the series of research pieces that inform what we're going to do. We're doing engagement. This is part of that process. It's a way of how we work. As I say, we're learning about construction products. It's not where we start from. And in fact, not many people do know about construction products regulation, and that's kind of evident in the number of pieces of work that's been done over quite a long period of time. So we're learning how to do that. It's what we do. We've picked up new regulation before and talked to our stakeholders, and it's kind of they've helped us understand. And we want to involve you guys in how we do things, hence again bringing the DLUC colleagues along so they can actually ask you and let you know what they're thinking is right now on the new regulations and get your feedback on those things. But also we need to be clear about what industry's responsibilities are as part of that engagement. So that's kind of the engagement piece. As I said, we're supporting colleagues in taking forward the new building safety bill and the SIs, and there's been quite a lot of close working between the two teams over the last few months, and it's worked ever so well when we've done that. We're recruiting and identifying skills and knowledge. We've got material scientists coming on board, technical experts coming on board, just to help guide us in what it is we need to do. And then what we're doing in terms of capacity, we're trying to address ineffective historic regulation within local authorities and supporting them. So a whole suite of training programs, helping them understand the standards, helping them understand the regime, helping them with technical inquiry, so our technical teams can actually go in there and give them some support if they've got some technical questions that they need solving. So that's a kind of how we are supporting our local regulators. So that's kind of the gaps thing that we're doing over time. But our priorities are kind of right now about transparency, letting everybody know who we are, reviewing the system, understanding how it all works, looking at the gaps. We'll use powers where we need to, and we can use any powers Secretary of State has because we're another government department. We're not an arm's length body. We are part of the Department for Business, although we're an office of government. So we can use the Secretary of State's powers, and we are about timing, acting promptly, based on a good understanding and the evidence in front of us. So a little bit more detail of what we're doing. So we're trying to understand what's gone wrong and why. That's all this research we're talking about. We're getting the evidence behind us. We're building our capacity and we're building our capability. But we are right in listening mode. Whilst we were announced last January, we didn't have any money until April. So I reckon we're nine months in to the work and we don't have new powers yet. So we won't be up and running until 2020. Our DLUC colleagues going to correct me on that one, but in 2023 we'll be up and running. But so we're in listening mode. We want to work with our new and existing stakeholders to shape our operations. Our existing stakeholders know this is where we work, but new stakeholders have got to, you'll find out that's how we do things. So in conclusion, so we're stepping in. It's a long-term challenge. We're just under no illusion that we can do this overnight. It cannot be overnight, but we will address immediate risks. We're committed, experienced regulators, and we will deliver the outcomes that are better for everybody. And right immediately, as I said to you, the funding started in April, and we will be fully operational by late 2023. But all of that is subject to the passage of the Building Safety Bill, and it's got to go through all of its iterations, and then the subsequent statutory instruments that will be attached to it. We'll support trade and standards teams at the moment using existing powers as we go through, but we will get those powers through the Building Safety Bill when we get them. But we, as I say, can't emphasise enough that until we get the powers, we can only use what we've got now and can't do that one. So as I say, the dedicated funding will support us, and it means it won't interfere with our other work on product safety, metrology and environmental regulations. So that's pretty much where we are. So we're kind of engaging with stakeholders, building our evidence base, building our capacity, working with DLUC on the regs, hopefully engaging with our stakeholders on all of that to make sure we're doing the job right. That's the end of my presentation, actually, Anna, for that. And I was going to hand over now. I'm going to try and stop sharing my screen and hand over to my DLUC colleagues.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you, Kim. You have ended your presentation and it's going over, which is fantastic. I have something for you to think about while your colleague is speaking, and that's what do you need from the industry? You've got a broad spectrum of the industry, of the home improvement industry around the table today. So I want you to tell us at the end when we hit the Q&A, what do you need from us and how can we help you? But I will be quiet now and we'll hand over to your DLUC colleagues. Thank you so much, Kim.
Great. Can everyone see my screen?
We can, yes.
Right, lovely. Okay, I'll make it bigger, then I can't see everyone else. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Helen Scott. I work in DLUHC. So I lead on the bits of the Building Safety Bill that relate to construction products and the regulations that we're going to be making using the bill's powers. So I'm going to race through very quickly because I'm conscious of the time and I know we want to leave time for Q&A, but very happy to share these slides afterwards if that would be useful. So I'm not going to spend much time on the context. Kim has been over that. The main thing to note, if you're not aware, the Building Safety Bill was introduced into Parliament in July 2021, and that creates a power to make regulations for the marketing and supply of construction products, which we intend to use to address the weaknesses in the current regulatory framework. So that it is those draft regulations that we are going to be talking to you about today. So if you're not familiar with the existing regulatory framework for construction products, it derives from the EU construction products regulations, with EU law continuing to apply in Northern Ireland. And there are various things that manufacturers have to do for products subject to a designated standard or a harmonised standard in Northern Ireland. So they need to carry out an assessment and verification of constancy of performance. So this might include third-party testing. So there's 5 different systems. They have to comply with the relevant one. Put in place factory control processes to ensure that this performance is consistently met, take corrective measures if there's an issue with the product, keep a register of complaints, and draw up a declaration of performance for at least one of the product's essential characteristics. However, not all construction products are covered by this framework. So there are standards which are mandatory for 444 product families. However, this means that the vast majority are not covered by the existing legislation. Most construction products are not covered by consumer product legislation either, because they're not, those that aren't available in outlets such as B&Q or Homebase that aren't available to consumers. So there's a regulatory gap there. Briefly talking through some of the issues that we're addressing with the existing framework. So first of all, there's no obligation for economic operators to proactively ensure that the products that they place on the market are safe or to provide any sort of consideration of the risks associated with the use of that product. And really that's because the basis of the regulations in European law is such that their focus is on harmonisation to ensure trade rather than promoting safety. So there are lots of products which would risk causing death or serious injury if they were to fail, and they're not covered by a regulatory framework. So as I said, there's a regulatory gap there, which means that even where there are products presenting a risk or concerns about the information that's provided, there's very little or nothing that regulators can do at the moment because they do not have to meet certain requirements. As Kim mentioned, Dame Judith Hackett also identified a number of issues in her report, including with arrangements for market surveillance and enforcement. So there's no national oversight of this at the moment. We don't really know a huge amount about what is going on. However, from our engagement with local governments, so local authority trading standards are responsible for enforcement of the existing regime. We know that enforcement to date has been very, very limited. Trading standards lack technical knowledge and expertise, and they don't prioritise construction products in the work that they do. So again, just very briefly, as Kim said, at the moment, we are engaging with a wide range of stakeholders. So we're not sure how long the bill's passage through Parliament will take, but this will create the powers to make our regulations. Once the bill has been through Parliament, at some point after that, we will publish regulations for formal consultation. We will then take into account responses, amend the draft, lay them in Parliament. There will be a parliamentary process. And following that, there will then be a transition period before the regulations come into force to allow time for industry to prepare and to get our comms and guidance out. We have published a draft version of these regulations, so that was published in October. It's available on gov.uk. And I will add the caveat, it is a draft. We know it's not the finished product. We are actively engaging with a lot of stakeholders at the moment because we want to make it as good as possible. So we will make some changes to the version we publish for formal consultation. And then following that formal consultation, we will further refine it. So it's very much an iterative process. very briefly, what does the proposed regulatory framework look like? So we want to close the current gap and ensure that all construction products available on the UK market fall under a regulatory regime. So first of all, we're planning to introduce a general safety requirement, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, requiring construction products to be safe before they can be placed on the UK markets. So this is intended to be a bit of a catch-all with a small number of exceptions to comply with our obligations under the Northern Ireland Protocol. We know that there are some products that are safety critical, so that's defined in the bill as those where their failure would risk causing serious injury or death. And we want to bring the regulation of these products in line with those regulated under the current regime. So that thing I was talking about at the beginning around assessment and verification of constancy of performance, third-party testing where appropriate, factory control, and so on. We are also proposing to maintain the existing regulatory approach. So where a product is subject to a designated standard or a harmonised standard in Northern Ireland, we're not getting rid of that. That will continue to be the case. We are bringing more products in scope of those arrangements via the safety critical list. So those lists will go side by side. There won't be any overlap. You won't have products on both lists because requirements are pretty similar. And then the general safety requirement will sit across all of those. So that will apply both to products not subject to a designated standard or on the safety critical list, but also to those as well. And this will be underpinned by strengthened market surveillance and enforcement arrangements, which Kim has spoken about a bit, and my colleague Tom is going to speak to a bit further in this presentation. So very briefly on the general safety requirements. So this is modelled on existing requirements for consumer products, which you may be familiar with. So that's the General Product Safety Regulations 2005. We intend to introduce a requirement that economic operators must not place a construction product on the market unless it is a safe product. So safe product is a term that's defined in the bill, and it's those products which under normal or reasonably foreseeable conditions of use, taking into account certain matters which are set out in the regulations, does not present any risk to the health and safety of persons, or if it does, the risk is as low as it can be compatibly with using the product. There's some really important points there. We want manufacturers to think proactively about normal or reasonably foreseeable conditions of use, but we recognise it's not possible for manufacturers to think of all possible uses of a product. We know that it's not possible for manufacturers to stop someone using a product completely inappropriately. However, there is an expectation that they will provide appropriate information and consider, what is normal or reasonably foreseeable, and provide information to enable products to be used safely in that way. We also recognise that it's not possible to require risks to be eliminated. So again, we're not saying that it has to be, we're saying it has to be as low as it can be compatibly with using the product. We are actively consulting on those certain matters cited in that box on the right hand side, which is set out in Regulation 6, to make sure that we've really considered everything you would possibly want. For example, the product's use, life cycle, installation, and so on, when considering whether it's safe or not, and considering what information you would want manufacturers to provide. So we would welcome any comments on that. The requirements on importers and distributors will be broadly the same as those on manufacturers, but in a way that's relevant to their role. So, for example, they won't need to draw up customer information, but they will need to pass it on to the next person in the supply chain or the customer. So that is the way in which the regulations are structured. There are obligations on each of these different groups. What might be of interest, as Kim was saying, is there are also other requirements that we're planning to introduce. So the provision of technical documentation and customer information is a big one. So for the general safety requirement, that's information about the product's characteristics, the risk assessment, and anything else considered relevant for its use. And customer information has to be drawn up in clear, easily understandable English, so that the end user has what they need to ensure that the product can actually be used safely. There'll be requirements around labelling the product with their details to enable traceability further down the supply chain, sample testing so that they can identify, so that economic operators can identify issues with the products they're making available on the market, and taking corrective measures if an economic operator identifies that there is something wrong, so that product does not hit the definition of a safe product. So for safety critical products, very briefly, as I said, we intend to bring their regulation in line with arrangements for products subject to a designated standard in Great Britain. So those things I talked about at the beginning. I won't go through it in detail in the interest of time, but on the left-hand side, we've got a bit of a flow diagram showing what we think the process is going to look like for adding products to the safety critical list. Again, this is something where the focus here is not on saying something is safe or unsafe in a very binary way, but actually ensuring that there's a provision of reliable performance information so that those who buy and use products have accurate information about how that product will perform. So they'll have the information from a risk assessment, which a manufacturer will be required to draw up about any risks that remain, even when they've reduced or eliminated these as far as possible. But also for those safety critical products where we know the impact of a failure could be particularly severe, there'll be additional information from that ABCP process that the manufacturer is required to follow, so that they can think about how they're intending to use the product, look at the information they have about it and decide whether that would be an appropriate use of that product or whether another type of product would be more appropriate. So as with the general safety requirements, the obligations on importers and distributors broadly mirror those on manufacturers in a way that is relevant to their role. So I'm going to hand over to Tom now to talk a little bit about false and misleading claims about performance and enforcement before we go back to a couple of questions that we have for this group.
Thanks, Helen. Oh, I've got a bit of an echo. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Bolton, also from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and I work with Helen on the bill and regulations for construction products too, mostly focusing on getting the National Regulator for Construction Products the powers it needs to do its job effectively. I was going to briefly talk about marketing and misleading marketing first. So what we've seen in the last couple of years, and I'm sure you're all aware, particularly through the evidence presented to Module 6 of the Grenfell inquiry, is that misleading claims about a product's performance can have catastrophic consequences. And what the draft regulations will do is include a prohibition on false or misleading claims about a product's performance with respect to any of the basic requirements for construction works. So where a claim is made about mechanical resistance and stability, fire safety, health, hygiene and the environment, accessibility and safety and use, noise abatement, energy and environmental performance, heat retention, sustainability, any kind of claim about a product's performance in regard to any of those characteristics must be true, or you are breaking the regulations. So what this prohibition will do is give OPSS, as the National Regulator for Construction Products, the powers to investigate, enforce and sanction misleading marketing in the construction product sector in a risk-based way. It's probably worth saying that manufacturers already can't make misleading claims. That's covered by other legislation, such as the Business Protection from Misleading Marketing Act. So there is other legislation in this space, but the existing enforcement authorities for that legislation are local trading standards, and we definitely want the national regulator in its national role to have that power to monitor and enforce against misleading marketing. And I think that's and worth just saying, as with any other prohibition and requirement in the bill, that works both for products directly sold to trade or sold to consumers. Can I have the next slide, please, Helen? Conscious I've only got a couple of minutes, so I was going to speak about the powers and sanctions available to regulators for these regulations. I wonder given I've got about 2 minutes, what's best to talk about? Probably worth saying that.
Tom, carry on as long as you need to. It's good stuff. Please carry on.
Okay, fine. Well, stop me when you get too bored. So on the investigatory and enforcement powers side of things, there'll be a toolkit of powers available to the Office for Product Safety and Standards as the national regulator, to local authority trading standards, and to district councils in Northern Ireland to enforce the new regime and the requirements that Helen has talked through. These powers broadly mirror the powers available to regulate consumer products. So, and you can see in the box on the bottom left-hand corner that's around entering premises, observing what's going on, requiring the provision of information, purchasing goods and testing goods to see whether they are doing as claimed, and seizing and detaining goods and documents. So that's what's happening in the investigatory and monitoring space. In terms of actually dealing with non-compliant products, there are 3 broad buckets of powers that regulators could use to remedy non-compliance. And these will be quite familiar to those who are aware of consumer product law. So basically, if there's an issue with a specific product or a specific type of product, regulators can issue a compliance notice, and that will require a product to be brought back into compliance. And regulators may specify what the business must do to bring that product back into compliance. If there's a problem with a business at a systemic level or across a range of products, regulators can issue an improvement notice, and in that, regulators will specify exactly what measures businesses must follow to bring that product or those products and the business back into compliance. And then to kind of prevent further harm from spreading, where a non-compliant product has entered the market, regulators will be able to require the withdrawal of the product, a recall of the product, or have access to various notices requiring businesses to inform others in the supply chain or consumer that they have received a product that has broken the rules in some way. Regulators will be also able to apply to court to forfeit goods and products too. On the sanctions side of things, we are turning the dial slightly in that under the existing construction product regulations, offences must be punished, if they are going to be punished at all, criminally. So I think the max sentence is something like 2 years in prison, but for most offences it's around 3 months, and the court may impose custodial sentences. May impose unlimited fines too. What we want to do in the future regime is give regulators more of an escalation route to sanction businesses. So regulators could choose to, instead of going down the criminal route, issue financial penalties, so monetary fines, and regulators will decide that themselves what an appropriate fine should be, and whether to pursue a civil case or a criminal case. And regulators will be also able to accept undertakings. So these will be voluntary arrangements where a business voluntarily signs up to ending the non-compliance and remedying it potentially through making a monetary contribution to an impacted party. So in terms of sanctions, you've got the civil route where regulators can issue fines, they could accept undertakings, or regulators could seek prosecutions, and those that breach the rules and are convicted could face unlimited fines and up to 2 years in prison. So the monitoring and enforcement provisions and the sanctions are I guess, more comprehensive than the existing regime, and hopefully will allow the national regulator and local regulators greater surveillance, greater awareness of problems, and a broader toolkit to deal with those problems. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about, and I'll welcome questions in a couple of minutes' time. I'm going to hand back to Helen because I think she had a few specific questions that we'd like to test with your members.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you. As Tom said, so at this stage, as I mentioned earlier, we would welcome general feedback and any questions or points of clarification in what we've spoken through today. I realise it's a lot of information to take in. A couple of points that we're particularly interested in and talking to various stakeholders at the moment. So firstly, on UKCA marking. So as lots of you will be aware, this indicates that the required conformity assessment processes have been carried out. So it will be replacing the CE mark in Great Britain. It doesn't indicate that a product is safe in all applications or combinations, hence what I was saying earlier about needing to engage with the relevant information to make a decision about how it's used. So in the current draft regulations, they are drafted in such a way that UKCA marking will be required for safety critical products in the same way as it will be for those products subject to a designated standard. This is one where we are actively seeking views on. As I say, we are concerned about UKCA marking being misinterpreted as a safety mark, but equally we'd like to know whether removing it would cause any problems. Is there any way in which actually keeping it on there would be useful? We're also actively reviewing the definition of a construction product. So that is included in Regulation 3, and it sets out which products and types of products will be in scope and out of scope. So I've got the current draft definition on this slide here, but would welcome comments on this. I think the most useful way to look through it is kind of views as to any types of products on the margins which you think should be in or out of scope, and any questions where you don't think that definition is clear as to certain things are in or out of scope, so that we can take away and consider it along with the other feedback received. And finally, not in this slide, but as I mentioned earlier, if you do have a chance to have a look at the definition of a safe product in the draft regulations, that would be really useful. That regulation 6.2 sets out the things that need to be taken into account when determining a product is safe, and we want to make sure that that list covers all of the relevant factors. So I've popped my email address and Tom's email address on this slide, and if you do have any comments following this session, we would be very, very happy for you to get in touch, and we will note those and consider them along with the others we've received. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Helen. Thank you to Thomas, and thank you also to Kim. That was a fantastic presentation given to the members of the National Home Improvement Council. Thank you so much.